in social and behavioral sciences, but many of the researchers that we have at Duke in social and behavioral sciences. And I also wanted to share that they are both assistant professors in psychiatry and behavioral sciences within the Duke School of Medicine. And John, his research involves substance use, ADHD, and HIV prevention. And he's also the co-director of the Biomedical Prevention Special Working Group for Duke CFAR. Roger, his research involves treatment of tobacco use disorder in patients with serious mental illness and treatment of tobacco use disorder in people living with HIV, both using mobile health technology. And without further ado, I'm going to put myself on mute. I'll ask that everyone, if you're not speaking, put yourselves on mute. And we're going to save questions for the end. So John and Roger both have some brief words planned, so they'll both speak, John and then Roger, and then we'll have a kind of a Q&A informal discussion at the end. And I'll be the informal timekeeper. So I will let you all know when you have 5 minutes left. I'll just kind of interrupt for a moment and let you know that. And then when you have just 1 minute left, I'll let you know also. All right, so John, do you want to take it away?
If I could interrupt just real quick, sorry about that. Is everybody hearing Sarah okay? I just got a private chat that it was a little hard to hear or breaking up a little bit. That just might be that one person, but just want to make sure everyone else seems to be okay. All right, thank you.
Okay, great. Well, yeah. It's nice to be doing this together with Roger as well, and looking forward to discussing mHealth. And so I actually prepared a couple of slides. Let's see, am I able to? Yeah, is it possible for me to share my slides? Okay, yeah, there we go. Let's see here. And, you know, kind of leading up to this and talking about like what the purpose was. So I'm not going to focus on like the app itself and the research that we're doing with it, but more of, you know, things like the development of it, you know, the kind of the process behind that, and, you know, the logistical issues that go into mobile health research. And so at first I thought I'd just start off talking a little bit about the development. And so the way that I got involved was that I was, you know, doing my research, and this company came along who already had this platform but needed guidance in the content on cigarette smoking and medication adherence while quitting smoking. And that was kind of like how I got involved. So so this company, yeah, they had this platform. They didn't quite, you know, have the content that they needed. It was, you know, focused a lot on, you know, kind of general guidelines for medication adherence, but less for this particular population. And then I, you know, got linked up with them through the chair of my division, because he knew that they were looking for people. And since I had access to the population that they wanted to work with, and then also, you know, a research knowledge base with this population as well, that was kind of the, you know, how we all got hooked up. And that was really like my introduction to it. So I wasn't necessarily looking to go in the mHealth direction, or even like have much of an appreciation at that point on developmental aspects and how to appreciate this. Like when Roger talks, you know, he really does, and I love hearing him talk about that, about, you know, the developmental piece. Yeah, because mine was very different. Mine was more agnostic. But so when I got involved in the development, like I said, it was focused mostly on what's the content to add in, and especially for this population. And so like I have a figure here. This was something early that we worked on, just like a bunch of decision trees. So they had the platform, they had the look for the app and all of that, but what about the questions that it asks and how that unfolds and things like that, and what are the little interventions that we want to add in there as well. And so these were the kinds of things that I helped out with on the front end. And then also like I was starting to do some research on PrEP as well at the time. And so after we got a grant through the CFAR, something that I did with the app was modify it. So we already had the app that was developed that we've been testing in cigarette smokers, and then I was able to adapt the content. Everything was structurally the same, but adapt it for PrEP. And so, just as an example of like how I've used this in research, I mean, so these have been like pretty. Like more like stage 1 trials, having a pre and post measure and then testing the app over an 8-week period. And looking at medication adherence, whether it's for smoking cessation or it's for PrEP. And so the kinds of things that we've done with it, and I thought this would kind of go into some lessons learned, is things that go into adapting apps in mHealth research. And so one thing that we were doing was especially on the PrEP side, I was interested in using contingency management to reinforce the behavior of medication adherence. And so we had in one study we had this fixed ratio schedule of reinforcement, so basically $2 every single time that you take your dose. And then in our more recent study, we adapted it for doing this fishbowl contingency management technique, where basically every single time, instead of earning $2 every single time that you take your medication, you get to take a chance, and it's analogous to sticking your hand in the fishbowl and getting to pick a prize out of it. Except that each time that you stick your hand into the fishbowl, you have the exact same probability every single time for getting $0, $1, $20, or $100. And it's a lower cost contingency management technique that's great, but I don't need to sing the praises of that. I think the purpose for this talk is a couple of things. Was one, like one logistical issue was like with the app, it's what do we have developed versus what do we want it to do in the future. And so like in this research, we wanted to be able to provide instant payments and reinforce that behavior as soon as we could. And that ran up against the logistical issue that wasn't built into the app. So, one thing that, to kind of keep in mind is the app that you want, and then the app that you currently have, and how does that not align? And so like in these studies, how it didn't align was that, we could tell them that they just earned money, but that wasn't up to the app to actually disseminate the money, but we had to do that, like the research team had to do that through like an Amazon e-gift card that we could send to their email address, that we would try to do close in time to when they logged their doses, but it wasn't part of the app. Another thing with this is like, especially in mHealth research, is having someone or a group of people that have the IT knowledge base to fix glitches that come up. Especially like when you're dealing with mobile health and money, and you're trying to get money into your participants' hands as quickly as possible. And when those problems do pop up, then what do you do? I mean, we had a fair number. We didn't have too many glitches, but we did have glitches. And so, in my case, like this was still working with the company, and it was either an SBIR grant that they had that I was more, consulting on, or this was a grant that I had and they were on as consults. But having a team set up to help address some of those random IT issues that you don't anticipate and you never fully anticipate, but are definitely going to happen. And then another thing I think like a logistical issue was like with having a team to work with is knowing what you want to have in the app, and then what you can deliver in the app through technological know-how. So for example, in doing this fishbowl technique, the equivalent that I had, my plan was like they could have like a series of like doors to open up, and do it virtually over the app. But then the IT people that I was working with the company said, no, we can't do that. But we can do like scratch offs, which I learned from Christina Mead, are called scratchies up in Massachusetts, I think. So instead, like we did scratchies instead, and had them do scratch offs whenever they logged a dose. And so that was something where it was, like the team that you're working with, and kind of, what's the limits of what you all can do, and it's restricted by by what they're able to carry out. And that wasn't a big deal, not having the doors. I think the scratchies were a much better idea in retrospect, but I didn't plan on that initially. And the goal here isn't to like highlight what the app looks like or anything like that, but I figured I would just show it just to give you an idea, like when we're talking about this kind of research, like what it's been like on my end. Basically what was developed was we have these 6 different circles here, and we call these the widgets. And so the app has 6 different widgets, and they all contain all these different small little interventions that are focused on medication adherence. And so thought I'd just kind of take you through a couple of these just to show you what it looks like. And so, the first thing is what we called our medication aid. And, so what the company was able to do was they were able to have the app access your camera, give you reminders when it's time to take your medication, and then you get that reminder, and then you click on that, and then it brings you up to this page, and it's time to take your morning dose. What do you want to do? Take it right now, or report, if you've already taken it, if you took it early. If you clicked on this one, take the dose now, then it would take you to this page, and it would have you click on the pill. And then once you click on the pill, this is a picture of Truvada, then it would access your camera and take a picture. And I think another thing, a lesson learned on this was I didn't know, like I only learned by meeting people who are, doing this mHealth research that really have the know-how. But that there are, a lot of limits that I thought there would be that there really weren't. And that was like a really interesting lesson to learn. So like with this, they could, we could take this a lot of different directions, but I had no idea that they could even like take a picture of the pill. They can do some automation work, and they had done this with other medications so that you could actually, if you do enough testing, tell if you're actually holding the correct pill. Which actually in the picture, that's not a picture of Truvada, that's a picture of Chantix. So you can do like all these neat things that I really had no idea that you could do. We could bank these pictures so that we could have the research team look at it. And that was really neat, and a big learning part for me was that, what are the things that you can do? And, really having to talk it out was really helpful, because I might have had the knowledge base on some things, but some of these technological aspects that I didn't was really helpful to hear. Let's see. So, so they would log their dose, and then they get told that they have a scratch off card. Then they would get bonus cards depending on if they would meet a particular baseline. And then, once they click on the play scratch off game, and they get a scratchy here, and then they scratch it off virtually, and then they get told how much they win. And then, one of the things that we try to do as a research team was to really stay on top of this. And so, we had a website on the back end where we could go back and check, okay, did they log their dose today? Did they do any scratch offs? And if so, how much did they win? And we really had to be vigilant about that, again, because it wasn't built into the app to automatically send that money to them, which ideally we would have if this was like not in a beta version of an app. Other things that the app did, assessed knowledge about PrEP, HIV knowledge, medication adherence difficulties that they traditionally have. We added in medication adherence strategies. So concrete behavioral skills that they could adapt or that they could apply. Coping strategies, this was more for coping with any side effects and how, knowing that that's in this content area that, side effects can obviously be quite a barrier to taking your medication daily. And so what can you do to cope with the side effects? We also had something where they could set times for their reminders, and then also a widget where they could track their overall progress, which, for one was like looking at what percentage of the time are you taking your medication? But given this intervention and, thinking the active ingredient was the contingency management piece, emphasizing how much money you've earned over time. And so, like in the logistical issues, and we've talked about some of these already, how the app is going to function in the future versus how it's going to function for your current research project. Being able to respond to glitches while collecting data. So having an IT team that is responsive to the issues that come up, and what do you do when you have a subject call you and, the app isn't working right for whatever reason. And so there's a fair amount of unanticipated time for these things to come up. Another big thing that I didn't talk about yet, but was just like navigating the IRB and issues that come up. So things like data security, is this an FDA regulated device? And also like how this stuff changes. And so I remember I put in one IRB application for one pilot study, and then about 2 years later put in another one. And over that time, a lot had changed in terms of data security expectations, in terms of what's possible, what Duke expects, what the IRB expects, how they want you to communicate that. And I think the way that can be dealt with most skillfully is just to be proactive. And so, contacting people with the IRB on the front end and having those conversations about, what's the best way to communicate risk to subjects in the consent forms. And so sometimes it wasn't an issue of what are the data security risks, but instead, how are we communicating this to our subjects?
Hey, John, about 4 minutes left. Thanks.
Oh, okay, great. Let's see, and just thinking that, for these IRB issues that come up, it might be that they've never dealt with this before. And so, so going into it, just kind of knowing that and going into it in a productive, collaborative kind of way so that everybody can learn from it and make it as seamless as possible. But it is a bit bumpy. And then also patients and / participants. So there's, challenges that pop up, and this kind of depends on the population that you're working with. So for example, one logistical issue is, how much to train people on using the app. So real world, in a real world setting, like when I download an app now, I don't get anybody explaining it to me, or I don't get a direction book. But, in some of our smoking studies, we've done that, and that was needed. And sometimes trying to get, your less tech savvy participants on board can really be a challenge. And something worth considering. And then, you know, in other circumstances, like for the prep studies that I've done, this has been, you know, young MSM, age probably 30 or below. And, you know, so one thing that I learned was that we don't need to spend any time describing the app and what it does. And, you know, we were sitting down with them for like 15, 20 minutes going over the app as they're downloading it. And what I learned was that they didn't need that at all, and they didn't want that, and they were able to do it on their own. And we were just explaining way too much. And then I guess the last thing is just data analysis. I mean, you get so much data, and this kind of goes back to the IT issue as well, like having a team that's able to work with all this data and sort through it. And you know, there's so much that can go into it in terms of data cleaning, analyzing the data itself. And so, yeah, having a good team going in on the front end that you feel confident that can do this, because otherwise, yeah, it can feel like quite a mountain.
Final thoughts in the last minute, John?
No, that's I'm actually that was my last slide. So
Perfect timing.
yeah, we were in sync.
Thank you so much, John. That was really a fantastic introduction to the work that you do and how it all came about and some of the logistical issues related to that. So next up we have Roger. I think there could be time. We could pause for maybe just one question if anyone has a burning question that they don't want to wait until the end for. Otherwise, we can do Q&A at the end. Any burning questions? Okay, great. Roger, do you have slides, or are you going to free-form talk?
Yeah, I don't have any slides.
All right, awesome. So we've got, you have up till 1:45 if you want to use that whole time. So take it away.
Okay. It's probably not. So I think I've been involved in mHealth research for about 10 years. I started doing PDA's work for my dissertation in grad school. And after my dissertation, I received formal training in user-centered design and to develop digital technologies. And I've been developing over the years several interventions. I helped develop a digital device to help people who are blind to actually practice yoga using Microsoft Kinect. I also helped develop an intervention for patients with gastrointestinal symptoms using a framework that we call self-experimentation. And then I've also been involved in smoking cessation work. I helped develop an application for smoking cessation for the general public. Then I developed one for my own research for patients with SMI. And I've been involved in also developing technologies for chronic pain and for mindfulness. So I've been involved in about 6 or 7 projects doing developing digital health. And I think I came to at a time when in 2010, I think the iPhone was just coming up and smartphones were just coming up at that time. And I kind of saw a little bit the progression, you know, the evolution of that field and how more and more people were getting, including myself, into this area. So I think one thing I would just say, you know, it's very impressive to see, John, you know, the work you've done in your research, you know. So I think the kinds of things you try to accomplish with your app and with your, you know, developing interventions for your patients, you actually tackle very serious problems from the start, like things like, you know, verifying that someone takes the medication, or even doing contingency management remotely. Those are things that I thought about, you know, some time ago, and I always was very, very cautious just to get myself into that, you know, that big project, because there's so many engineering challenges, and and logistical and institutional hurdles. And I think it's very impressive that you got to do all those things. And I think the other thing I would just comment on is that the way you kind of described your process, you never got training in doing this kind of work in grad school. I didn't get in grad school either, but I got myself, thanks to the K, got some training in engineering, in design. But at the same time, companies are really, they could not do anything without domain experts, and how that's what they call us. Because really, when you're trying to modify health behavior, a software developer, it's going to be quite unprepared to do that without counting on clinicians and people who actually understand the real issues of their patients. So yeah, I think that's something that is worth to capitalize if you're connecting with companies. And I think good companies should really appreciate all the domain expertise that you have and try to work with you to really find a good, get out the best product, but really using your skills. So I think from my perspective, so I think there's a number of things lessons or things that I, from my view are important, and does this kind of work. I think one aspect would be the importance of early phase research and kind of taking advantage of a lot of small end designs that we've been trained on, as psychologists or behavioral scientists, like single case designs or small end studies. Those are ways in which we can conduct, get clinical data about the effect or the preliminary effects or the feasibility of our interventions in a relatively cheap way. And NIH right now with the Orbit model is really emphasizing this qualitative early phase single case studies in some cases to conduct this kind of early phase research. I think in my case, it was very important, and it really helped me to develop the smoking cessation app that right now we to test in a large trial. And then the other methodology that I think is also very, very cost effective is using user-centered design. It's super cost effective because you can recruit 5 subjects, which is, according to the engineering literature, with 5 subjects, you resolve close to 85% of all the errors of a system. And on that, you might want to go a little above that number, but the point of this heuristic of how many subjects you need to test a system is that you can learn a lot of things from a very small number of subjects. And that was my experience when we were back in 2005 when I got the K, and I did an initial user-centered design of an existing app in patients with SMI, and we run it with 5 subjects. It was incredible, the amount of information and insights that we got from these patients. And there's a complete literature to be able to run this kind of user-centered design studies. There's a lot of methods, there's different approaches, there's a very flexible approach. But I really recommend for people to consider using these methods and consult with people who knows about those methods and try to do that. They also can be very short duration, so you don't have to you can go from one lab visit, and we did just that in our HIV R21 last March. We can do that with just one visit, but if you want to get even more intense data, you can also have one field study where you give people the app for 1 week and you bring them back, and you can learn a lot from that experience. For the HIV study, for example, we started to do this one-time visit UX study in person, but we transitioned to remote during COVID because we ran 2 subjects right before March 16th, and then we put together a quick amendment, or actually we might not have needed it, but we had to do some things to kind of make it work with because Duke was trying to figure out how to allow us to continue our research in response to COVID. So but we were able to put together a remote UX study. So using Zoom, like we are talking right now, we interviewed patients. We showed them, we screen shared our app, and we were recording their reactions, and we were interviewing them as they were looking at the app. And we run splice subjects in that way. We also learned a lot. And that was the basis or the foundation of the app for HIV that now we are about to launch maybe this week or next week in patients with HIV who smoke. So there's a lot you can learn with these methods. I really recommend it. Some of the barriers sometimes the people doesn't have the training, but again, if you're a behavioral psychologist and you have some experience doing qualitative research, this is going to feel like second nature to you, because a lot of the UX, user-centered design research is mixed methods research. So I really recommend it. So I think doing this kind of work, early phase research work, can be a really strong foundation for later RCT or pilot RCT. And I think the other thing that I've learned over these years is that I work with people working with companies to develop software in many ways. So when I was at the University of Washington, the yoga device using Kinect to people who are low vision or blind, the main investigator was a PhD student, and so she was a computer scientist, and she developed the technology herself. So that's one model. Even if there's expertise within your group that can do that, and that can work. But if you have the budget and you're putting proposals, I think it's important to be generous with the research budget for the company, because I think we normally underestimate how much it costs to develop technology. And the only way in which it can hurt you to put a very generous budget for software development is that maybe reviewers might have an issue. I haven't had an issue myself. But if you do that, you can always reallocate. If you don't use all those funds, you can negotiate your contract with your vendor, or whatever you think is reasonable, and then you can use those funds for something else that is needed. But I think if you don't have that buffer to work with, sometimes you end up with companies that are frustrated. There's always like a scope creep that they call, like when you just start to do something and it's a little bit beyond what's feasible, and then the cost trickling down the road, and then everyone's unhappy because the researcher doesn't have the technology that works, and the vendor keeps putting resources and spending time and money, and they have to feed their company. They have to sustain their company. So I think that's one thing. And the other thing is really, to me, it's always been helpful. I had, when I started to work with vendors, I had little experience having done that. I was very intimidated to work with vendors. But I think someone told me early on when I was on my K99 in Seattle, you have to empathize with a company, because they have quarter goals and they have to keep the lights on, and they're entrepreneurs. Their safety net is very often more precarious than ours. And you're a sub-money researcher, and so it's important to really have some kind of understanding that they really have constraints, and most of the companies, unless it's really big companies, they just don't have the budgets and the capacity to keep pouring money on something. So I think that's an important thing, to cultivate that relationship and understand that we all need to meet our needs. So the final thing I would just say is that if you develop whatever you develop, I think it's always helpful to work with your tech transfer, at Duke, we have the Office of Licensing and Ventures. In other places, they call this type of office in different ways, but any kind of office in your institution that deals with tech transfer. And I think it's important to work with them because it's a way to protect your intellectual property. And it doesn't really hurt you to do that. And if you do that early on, you kind of minimizes problems with a potential vendor you're working with. It's normally if it's a vendor relationship that you really clearly, I'm the owner of this intellectual property, and I want you to develop this idea, to the execution, to practice, which is what, that's a term that's typically used for. And so if you do that, I think that's more helpful. And if you have a different agreement, but at least whatever agreement it is, it's good to put it on paper because it facilitates problems down the road. So that's something that helped me to do that. And having said that, not everyone around me, not everyone I work with ever necessarily has follow that path. But to me, that's something that I think it was helpful to have. Yeah, so someone asked, what's the generous amount in the budget? What's the range? I don't know. I think something. I think nowadays something around 100K it's a good reasonable budget. And I think, yeah, so I think you've done. Some people, you can think about 80K. It depends on the company, and also it depends on many things. But yeah, if you go with $30,000, that's very difficult. You're going to come up with, unless it's something very simple, you're taking something already existed. Yeah, so those are my thoughts.
Thanks, Roger. So we've got plenty of time for discussion. I will invite you all, if you would like to turn on your cameras. Don't feel like you have to, but we're going to be discussing. And then also just wanted to let you all know, if you go to the top right corner in your Zoom window and you click on view, you can actually go to gallery view instead of speaker view. So you can actually see everyone at the same time, which hopefully will facilitate more of a discussion. So thank you so much, Roger and John, for sharing your experiences and your knowledge and wisdom. So you feel free to ask questions. You can either take yourselves off mute to ask questions, or you can type your questions in the chat. We also invite, we know that there are other SBS researchers who are here who also do mobile health research. So if there's anything that you all would like to add, we also invite you to do that as well. So any questions or comments?
Yeah, I've got a question for Roger about doing user-centered design, especially now. So you mentioned doing it remotely, and I was just curious what your impression is. Like I'm almost wondering, like, oh, is that actually, a better fit in that, especially for the qualitative piece, it could be a lot easier to record, and is it easier to transcribe things, and you're having them assess technology, so doing it remotely kind of takes it more, at least it feels like, out of the lab. And I don't know, like whenever we're able to go back to doing things more in person, do you think you'll want to switch back, or are there things that you like about doing this remotely that you want to keep?
Yeah, we recruited 5 people in a week and a half. It was very quick, and so I don't think that would have been possible if that was in person. I think the other advantage is that, so in user-centered design, when you do those kinds of interviews, the classic approach is, you have an interviewer, the person who's leading the questions, and then you have the observer in the room, someone who's actually picking up, nonverbal signals, observing the whole situation, picking up on behavior from the user that is not captured well. So you want to have that role, but with Zoom, we're able to do the same thing, but we had coordinator was leading, and then myself or another coordinator assistant was observing the same interaction. She put her camera off, but she was still listening. And so the same role, we were able to play the same role. And you're right that we were able to record faces. So I think in a way, because the information security office, at first we were like, well, we don't want to add, maybe recording faces is worse than recording voices. But the information security office or some office at Duke, I just can't remember exactly who was it, but they considered that voice is as insecure or is equal. It's the same breach than a face. So so there's no distinction between one or the other. And of course, for us, being able to see their face is way more helpful, behaviorally, to be able to understand user reaction. So we have everything recorded. So in that way, we improve the methodology. The part that it was a little bit different, which I think we had a special recording camera that was on top of the device. So in the lab, we had people to come in, and we had this camera on top of the device, a special camera, high resolution, that we purchased. And then we could see people just touching the screen or getting lost and having errors. That part we were not able to do because we were changing the app as they were using it. So we would show them, okay, this is the next screen, and what do you want to touch from the screen? Okay, go into this button, and our research assistant would do that. So we're missing that part. So it's but it had some pluses. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we haven't tried to publish that yet, but I don't know. I mean, I think because of we were able to really do so many barriers, but we eliminated by being able to do that from their home. Yeah.
I had a question for both of you as well. So one thing, so I'm part of a behavioral intervention technologies implementation work group. And one of the things that oftentimes is really difficult when you're going from efficacy testing to then trying to potentially look at effectiveness or even look at implementation of an intervention technology is figuring out who's the consumer, right? So who's paying for the app, and then who is sort of marketing the app. Is it marketed to individuals? Is it marketed to health systems? What are the main sort of cost effectiveness outcomes that would be of interest related to these types of apps? And so I'm curious, related to both your tobacco cessation app, Roger, as well as John, your medication adherence app, and especially considering contingency management as part of that equation, what you all's perspectives are related to that.
Yeah, I mean, like in terms of like the cost effectiveness, it's really been interesting because, where that's come up for like projects that I've put in funding for, it's, especially with the contingency management piece, yeah, there's questions about like, yeah, I guess the larger implementation of this and how practical is this. But that's been, largely addressed through, well, there's examples of like the VA doing contingency management and things like that. And I've been able to address it that way. But on the other side, with like the SBIR contracts, that's been interesting because they get like, like the ones that I've been involved with have been through NIDA, and NIDA's interest in like the marketing of this app through those mechanisms is very different. And we would have calls with the Duke team, the people at the company, and NIDA for the SBIR grant. And yeah, we would talk about the study that we're doing and do a recruitment update and talk about the science. And then there'd be a discussion about, like implementation of this and what's the practicality of it, the cost effectiveness, and, how can you really scale this thing up, and who are your consumers, which is a very different language. So, I mean, for me, it kind of depended on the funding mechanism.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many implementation questions that, I think some time ago I used to think, well, this has high reach. A lot of the I've been gotten to know more of the implementation science literature lately, and I think the normal thinking was this has high reach because everyone's downloading apps, so therefore, it should be widely disseminable right away. But there's so many questions about implementation that, for example, people having reliable data plans, or the device is actually working reliably, having a good customer service. That if an app doesn't work, can they call someone? We just published a review of opiate apps for opiate use disorder apps, and we found that only one app met the APA standards from a metric used by the American Psychiatric Associations for evaluating the validity and the potential rigor of apps. And only one app made that standard. And I think even like things like the CDC had an app, and one of the criteria was, has the app been updated within the last 90 days? And this app, right, the CDC had not been updated. So little things like that are important implementation issues. And I think we need to think more about those issues. I think working with a company that really has experience developing app, that's an implementation strategy in and of itself, rather than an in-house app developed project, because a lot of vendors, they do commercial, they work with companies with commercial entities, and they really ensure that, they have an eye into paying attention to things like, is this engaging? Is this actually working? Is this like the bugs are, problem-solving bugs, and then the software itself, that's an issue that they really pay a lot of attention to. So I think that kind of resolves a lot of implementation barriers, but it's not all of it. And who's going to pay for those apps if there's a cost? There's a lot of questions that still need to be answered. So there's for example, there's a Reset app that has been validated and approved, cleared by the FDA for smoking, for substance use, and then there's Reset O for opiate use disorder. So this company, Pear Therapeutics, they've done a lot of effort working with the FDA and trying to push that regulatory oversight pathway. But there's other companies actually not going through that regulatory pathway, like Click for smoking cessation, or Dynamic Care, another company, is doing a lot of that work. And they're trying to kind of like not go through this path, but still with an eye on implementation and really disseminating, getting things out there in the hands of people. So it's interesting to see what's going to happen, 5 years from now, moving forward.
Other questions, comments?
I'll ask the one to John. It's kind of somewhat just related to what Roger was just talking about. But John, when you were talking about IRB issues, you mentioned about how the IRB was asking about if it's FDA qualified app, and how do you work? Well, how did that go with the IRB? That discussion about if it's not an FDA qualified app and being allowed to use it.
Yeah, well, the last time that I went through it with the new protocol, I was told that I'd be curious to hear what you've heard, Roger, but that in the future, like they're pretty much all going to be, you're going to have to say, yes, these are all FDA regulated. And I just did a renewal for my annual renewal for one, and they wanted me. This was for the first one that we did, like about 10 years ago, and because I still have the IRB open, and they asked me to change it to FDA regulated, and we had to kind of go back and forth even about that, because it wasn't at the time, and so it's very much, my sense is it's a changing thing. Yeah, but yeah, I heard that moving forward that apps going through, there's going to be more FDA regulation for intervention apps. Have you heard anything like that, Roger, or is that?
Yeah, so that's the part that's a little bit frustrating, because I think a lot of offices at Duke had different views on that, because I've been going back and forth between multiple entities, and I would get feedback on one end and different take on different. It changes from time to time. I think our in our devices, an abbreviated exemption, and that term is kind of abbreviated IDE, investigational device exemption. And I think that's the latest I heard about our device. But it's so that's something that I frankly just don't have a lot of clarity about what those things mean. And I know the FDA, they have the for some devices they have the discretion to regulate or not. So they're going to be on a case-by-case basis. They can decide whether something needs to be regulated or not. So there's a wide range of devices that might fall within that open space, and it's just that ambiguity is kind of hard, because they have the discretion to do that, but they're not enforcing it, or they might not. And so that makes it a little bit challenging. And a lot of people just tries to go through the wellness kind of pathway and avoid altogether any possibility of their device being regulated, or the need for regulation. So that's one part, frankly, I'm happy to, if someone's going through that process, I'm happy to talk to you and see, share our experience more specifically. But yeah, it resonated, what we went through resonates with what you just said, John, because not only that, for example, our first app we did not to go through an information security office audit. And so we got the app approved for different grants, and then for the HIV grant, they decided they had to do a full review. It took them 4 or 5 months to do that, and the results were minor concerns, so they were not concerned, and we knew that in a way because our app doesn't use a lot of geolocation. A lot of, we don't capture images. There's relatively low risk system. And in a way, we're happy. Now we have that document from the ISO office saying, your device is safe. That's fantastic. So we're happy to know that for sure, because they really tested the app. They just do like they simulated a hacker trying to get into the code and break it and steal information from your devices. They tested and there's minimal, medium to minimal risk. So that was good news. We know that now, but it just makes it more challenging. And I have a sense that I've been speaking to people at Johns Hopkins, Stanford, and other places, and their ability to get mHealth studies approved by their IRBs and by the institution is much more fluid, straightforward. So I don't know why. I don't know what's the policy at Duke that is different from those other institutions. Why there's that emphasis? I understand there's liability issues, but we also want to be on the cutting edge of science, and it's hard to do cutting edge science in mHealth if you're always 6 months behind everyone else, because that's how long it takes to get approval.
I agree with the, especially the ambiguity, like for, expectations and regulation. And I think part of that is, also just how it changes over time. And so, what was the rule 1 year ago is now changed.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank both of you for this very enlightening discussion. And I'm putting the link to the Duke CFAR Social and Behavioral Sciences Core website into the chat. So just want to remind everyone that these Rocket Talks are a regular occurrence. We don't have our schedule set for 2021 yet, but stay tuned. And if you're not on the SBS Core listserv, please go to the website. There should be a link there to sign up. So thanks again to Roger and John, and thank you everyone for coming.
Thanks a
Thank
lot.
you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.